Welcome back to another chapter of the Diamond Star Stories featuring the players and the stars of the 1934 to 1936 Diamond Star set produced by the National Chicle Company. This one's going to be a little bit different than previous videos because this is the only non-player in the set. Although he was a previous player manager, it is none other than Boy Wonder Bucky Harris. Card number 91, which is going to be exclusively, it says 1935 release here on there, but it should be a 1936 release. I think they have the flip wrong on there for the most part. But anyway, as you can tell, actually on the print mark on the back here, at least the trademark, it's produced in 1936. So actually this is an error by SGC listing it as a 35, and it's actually a 36. Bucky Harris was known as the Boy Wonder for his accomplishment of becoming a player manager at the age of 27 with the Washington Senators in 1924 and leading them to the AL pennant and subsequent World Series. And following up with that with an AL pennant in 1925, this was, of course, as people know, Walter Johnson's only World Series title, and that's probably what it's more known as. But Bucky Harris was a second baseman on that team who was anointed to become a manager at that time. And as we're going to go through his career, was known more as a manager, was a Hall of Fame manager that was inducted in 1975, 2 years before his passing in 1977. Harris was born in 1896. He was known as Stanley Raymond Harris. He got the name Bucky through his times in playing minor league baseball. He dropped out of school, high school, at the age of 13 and started working in the coal mills of Pennsylvania. He was born in New York, but his family relocated to Pennsylvania shortly thereafter. And he started playing semi-pro ball and was eventually picked up as minor league baseball and played there for 3 years before debuting in 1919. An interesting fact about when he was picked up in 1916 as a minor league player, he was signed by then future Hall of Fame manager and player Hugh Jennings. So he was picked up at that time and was brought into minor league organizations, and he eventually kind of worked his way up. His older brother was a minor league player too, so it kind of ran in the family. But he was again picked up and debuted later in 1919 with the Washington Senators, where he spent the majority of his playing career. And as I mentioned, at age 27 in 1924, he was moved into the player manager role, position that he held until he was released and traded, I should say, over to Detroit when they decided to anoint Joey Cronin as the player manager for the Washington Senators at that time. So he then moved into the managerial role with the Detroit Tigers in 34 and 35, if I got that correctly, which actually are the years when they actually went to the World Series and won the World Series. So he went to the World Series, but they lost the World Series, I should say. So let me kind of go through a little bit, kind of talking about, he bounced around a lot as managing. He had 3 different stints with the Washington Senators. He managed them, let's see if I have the years here correctly. Actually, I don't have it open right in front of me, but he did it 3 times with them, 2 times with the Tigers, 1 year with the Red Sox, 2 years with the Yankees, where he actually won a World Series in 1947, and 1 year with the Phillies. He managed all the way into the 50s and then had stints doing minor league managing, both in the Pacific Coast League and I believe also in the International League during these stints when he was actually not a major league manager, then moved in subsequently into the front office. So here's his Diamond Star card. And you can see it's got some roller marks on here. This is kind of not uncommon for this card in particular. Not sure what happened with the printing of this card, but you see a lot of copies with those roller marks on there. Otherwise, it's a very nicely centered card for the Diamond Star set. It features him kind of in a stadium with the grandstand behind him with the multicolored flags that are pretty common the way they designed the Art Deco cards. And unlike the back, they don't have any player stats with him. They talk about him being the player manager for a little while, moving into managerial jobs exclusively. What I thought was interesting about Bucky Harris is that he kept getting replaced by a lot of Hall of Fame players that became player managers. So I mentioned he was traded in 1924 or 1929. Actually, I was wrong about Joe Cronin at this point, but it was actually to allow Walter Johnson to become the manager of the Washington Senators after he retired. And then he went over to Detroit. And I'm wrong about this too. Actually, he was replaced in Detroit by Mickey Cochrane in 34. Mickey Cochrane was the one that actually took him to the World Series at that point. And then he returned to Washington at that time. And then that's when he was replaced by Joe Cronin. And he was traded along to Boston to be able to bring Joe Cronin back to the Senators at that point. And then Cronin became the player manager of the Senators, and then he became manager of the Boston. He had a falling out after just one season in Boston with an owner, and then he was let go. At that point, he was kind of out of baseball for a little bit, and then was later picked up in '43 by the Phillies. Had a hard time with the owner at that team, and he was let go. And he was out of Boston for a little bit then thereafter. And then he was brought in by the Yankees in '47 and actually managed them for 2 seasons until he was replaced by was let go by the owner at that time to bring in Casey Stengel. He did win a World Series in '47, which is the series that they beat the Dodgers, which was Jackie Robinson's debut in the World Series. Then he managed, like I mentioned, in the Pacific Coast League for a little bit of time at that time, then returned to Washington in 1950. There are some cards of him in the early 50s with the Bowman sets, where he's with the Washington Senators. And then he finished up for 2 more seasons with Detroit later on that decade, I believe in '55 and '56. He later joined Joe Cronin's front office with the Boston Red Sox later on in his career. And it was kind of, I think, there during the time they actually brought on their first player of color, which was the last team to be able to do that in the late 50s. So he was part of the front office staff that eventually did that in Boston. As some could say, they reluctantly did that, unfortunately. And then he went on to be a scout with the White Sox. Then he became a special assistant in the Washington Senators organization. This was the new Washington Senators in the 1960s. And he stayed on in that role at some point into the early 70s. He was elected into the Hall of Fame in 1975, and unfortunately he passed away with Parkinson's in 1977. So during his time as a manager, he won 2,158 wins. He had 2,219 losses. That's right, his winning percentage was actually under 500. I think at the time when he retired, I think he had the 4th most wins in Major League Baseball. And I think he still holds the record of having the longest gap between World Series titles since a manager. I don't know if that's since been eclipsed. He was the first rookie manager to actually win a World Series, which has been equaled 3 other times since then. But at that time, it was kind of unseen and unheard of. That's why he got the name Boy Wonder at that time. As a player, he was a very good defensive player, good double play combination player too. So he really kind of stood out on the field in that regard, not so much at the plate. He had a WAR of 16.3, an average of 274. He had just under 1,300 hits, scored 722 runs, and drove in 508 RBIs. Predominantly with the Senators, he spent a little bit of time after he was moved to Detroit and played a little bit, but these were very small games over the course, I think, of 29 and 31, and didn't actually take the field in 30. So that's kind of it about Bucky Harris. So definitely a pretty well-known name during the eras of the 30s, 40s, and early 50s for his time as a manager. I think it's probably a name that's been somewhat lost to history. And I think for people that are collecting kind of the golden era cards, they're kind of often like when they have to like get Hall of Famers for that set, they're like, who is this Bucky Harris? When they pick it up and they start learning a little bit more about him. I first learned of Bucky Harris myself when reading books back about 25 years ago about baseball from the 1930s and 40s. His name came up, I think, in regards to being part of the Washington Senators teams that won in the 1920s. I think subsequently kind of being the manager of the Yankees when I was reading books about like Jim Maggio and also Jackie Robinson. So this is an earlier card of his. There are cards of him during the 1920s. This is one of his managerial cards only, as I mentioned earlier, because he was no longer a player manager. You can see he's still relatively young in this picture, unlike the cards you see of him in the 1950s. And finally, again, once again, it's a 36 release, not a 35 release on the flip here. That doesn't make it any more rare that SGC made that error. I think they just need probably some more people that are there, a little bit more knowledgeable sometimes about like vintage sets to make sure they get the years right. I'm not the first one that kind of has said that before, but sometimes they make little errors like that, specifically within this set and probably with batters up as well. Sometimes they just kind of misplace the years. But that is Bucky Harris. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I have another episode coming this week, not of this series, but debuting the new series of the 1967 Topps High series. I hope you've enjoyed both of these. And I'll be back soon with some other subsequent videos that I hope to be able to share with you as we're continuing on this lovely journey of redoing my card room. May have some updates for you by next weekend. And I'll have another complete set this month. and I hope to be able to share some pickups that I'm able to make over the course of the next month. All right, have a great rest of your week and weekend.